Hello everyone, this is the CS Revelation and welcome to a new video on Java. Today we're going to focus on Java one-dimensional arrays. Now you can easily create 1, 2, or 3 variables and assign values into them. However, if you needed to keep track of 100, maybe 1,000 values, then going with the solution of creating 1,000 variables makes it inefficient. And it makes your code difficult to read, difficult to maintain and understand. So the go-to solution is to use Java arrays. And Java arrays will allow you to create one location that you can place multiple values of the same type. Now, arrays, elements inside of arrays have different indexes, and the first element is located at index 0, and the next element is located at index 1. So let me just type here the index, and that is to simplify things. So the first element here, which is 5, is located at index 0. 6 is located at index 1. The element 15 is located at index 2. 10 is located at index 3. And 56 is located at index 4. -9 is located at index 5. And 10 is located at index 6. So the lower bound of this array is 0, and the upper bound of this index array is 6. Now, like I said, an array is a consecutive storage for multiple items of the same type. And you can store a value in an array using the index value. You can get a value from the array also using the index. So an index is, think about it as the address or the location at which a value is stored. So it points at a value. Now, to simplify the idea of array, think of them as if like you have a row of lockers. Now, each one of these lockers is going to have its own number. So to distinguish between all these lockers, you refer to the number. So for example, locker number 4, by going to the number 4 there, you recognize that this is the locker from which you're going to retrieve a value or place a value. So each one of these lockers has a different number, and that's what distinguishes these lockers from each other. Now, similarly, arrays, values inside of arrays have different indexes, and each index will distinguish a value from the rest of the values. Now, to create an array, you will state the type of values that will be stored in this array. Then you put the square brackets, then the name of the array, and then you will use the assignment operator to assign the values that are separated by commas and enclosed in curly braces. Now, to print the values, let's say we wanted to retrieve the values from this array and we want to print them all. So maybe we want to print the first value first. So printing the first value by using the systemoutPrintln statement, you will refer to it by mentioning the name of the array from which we're getting the values, which is numbers, and in brackets, square brackets, you're going to refer to the index value that it points at it. So if I want the value 15, I'm going to say the value that is at index 2. That's the one that I would like to print. So when you run that, you get 15 printed. Now, if you want the first value, it's always going to be located at index 0. And if you want the last value of this array or the last element, know that it is located at the number of elements minus 1. So let's count how many elements we have here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. These are 7 values, 7 elements. So the last index or the upper bound is going to be the size or the length minus 1. And I can actually program that. So I could say numbers.length minus 1. So the length minus 1. So the length is going to be how many values we have here, which is 7, and minus 1 is going to get me 6, which is the upper bound index in my array. So this is going to print the last value, which is 10. Now suppose that what we want to do is to print all the values all at once. I can use a for loop, and that is because this is a repetitive process. Instead of printing them separately, I could just use a for loop that has an iterator that starts at the first index, which is 0, and then is going to stop at the last index, which we just figured out that it is length minus 1. So I could simply use that. I'm going to say less than or equal to numbers that length minus 1, and it increments by 1, so I could go through all the index values. And what I'm printing here is going to be all the values of numbers, and I'm injecting I there. Because now for all the I values, from 0 to numbers that length, that means from 0 to 6, for all the I values that are from 0 to 6, print numbers of I. So the first is going to be numbers of 0, then numbers of 1, then numbers of 2, and numbers of 3, until numbers of 6. So this is going to print all the values of my array. Now, there's one more thing that I want to mention here, is that there is another way to declare an array. So this is one way to create an array, but actually it is a 2-in-1 process. It's declaring the array and also assigning the values into it. Now, suppose that you don't know the values. You know that you need an array of numbers, but you don't know the values yet. Maybe the values will be generated based on another process, or based on another calculation, or the return value of some functions, or some procedure. So by declaring an empty structure, use this code. So for example, we know that the values are of type integer, so we can mention the type, and then empty brackets, then the name of the array. I'm going to call it scores, and then you're going to use the equal and the new command to instantiate this array. So you're going to say it is a new integer array, but there's something that you need to mention here in these brackets, and that is the length of this array. So suppose that we want 10 elements. Now, please do not confuse the size, which is the length of the array, with the highest index, or the upper bound. So this value here states that we are creating a structure that is capable of storing up to 10 elements. So this creates the array, and you can assign the values individually here. So you could say scores of a specific index, for example 0, is equal to 100, and let's say scores of 1 is equal to, for example, 200. And you don't have to follow the order of the index. That means you don't have to insert them in this order, 0, 1, 2, 3. You actually can insert them out of order, and also you don't have to insert all the values. Some cells could be left empty. However, we have a constraint that the maximum number of elements is 10. So I could simply insert at index 9, and I'm going to say equals, for example, 800. But I cannot do this. I cannot do scores of 10 and assign a value, for example, 900 into it. The reason for that is because this index is outside the bounds. So the first index is 0, but the last index is always the length minus 1, which is 9. Now notice that I'm going to run this. It's going to tell me index out of bounds exception, and that is because it was attempting to insert this value in this index, but this index does not exist. So this is a no. Now, also you could print the values of this array the same way you printed the values of this array, and that is by using a for loop. So I could simply do the same thing here. So I'm going to say for int I equals 0, and now this is scores that length. So it is scores that length minus 1. And I'm going to say system out print line scores of I. There's one more thing that you actually you could do this. It's either that you subtract 1 from the length, or you could just simply make it strictly less than scores.length, which is going to avoid the less in the value 10. So if I run this now, notice that what I get, this is something that tells us about empty cells in arrays. Let me first of all comment this part out just so we only see the values of this index array. Okay, so let's run this again. Okay, so we got 100 because we put it in index 0, and we got 200 because we put it in index 1. However, the next value we put is 800 in index 9. So these values here are zeros because we did not place any values in these indexes. So by default, Java will append a 0 to an empty cell in an array. So that's something that you should know, is that it is not empty. A cell is not empty in an array, even if though you have not assigned a value into it. However, is going to be by default equal to 0. Now, the next thing we want to do, let's take a look at, for example, how can we print, let's say, the sum of all the values that we have in the array. So you're going to do the same thing. You're also going to use a for loop because we want to loop through all the values of the array. However, we just want to add all them up. So say that, first of all, let's print the values of this array. And I'm going to say plus, let's say space between all these values. So this is going to print them in one line. Now these are the values in my array. And I'm going to use another for loop, same for loop, except that the process is different. In this process, I'm going to be adding them up. So it's going to be always the same loop if you're looping through all the values. It's starting at 0 and it scores.length strictly less. So this is basically all the indexes. But what you're going to be doing here is up to you. So let's declare a variable here of type integer. We're going to call it sum and initialize it to 0. So this loop is going to loop through all the values and it's going to add them up to sum. So I'm going to say sum is equal to, the name of the array is scores of I. So scores of I. So it is sum plus scores of I. So what's going to happen here is that it's going to add scores of I, all the scores of I, scores of 0, scores of 1, scores of 2, into sum. And then once it's done adding, I'm going to print them all just one time. So I'm going to use a print line statement to just print it. So I'm going to say println the sum, for example, the sum of all values is, and then I'm going to find that in the variable sum. Okay, so let's find out if this works. So and I also want to break a line here just so we separate. So I'm going to use the /n. That's going to break a line there. Okay. So notice that these are the values of my array, and this is the sum. So it is 1,100, which is 800 plus all these zeros plus 200. That's 1,000 plus 100. That's 1,100. So this loop has looped through all the values of the array and kept adding them into sum. And in this line, we just printed the final value of sum. Now you could do a lot with arrays. The most important thing is understanding how to declare an array, how to assign values into an array, and how to retrieve values from arrays, right? And that is always by referring to the index and the array name. So the array name at specific index. So two ways to declare arrays. It's either a 2-in-1 process. That means declaring and assigning values at the same time, and that's this method here, or declaring the array, then assigning the values separately. So I'm going to end this video here because this is just a quick overview of arrays, and stay tuned for some practice assignments or projects on one-dimensional arrays. All right, I'll see you in the next one.